Okay, well, hello and welcome back. You are watching a podcast series that we're entitling America Under Fire, The Old Guy Speaks. We have finished some depopulation topics and we're moving into several smaller miscellaneous topics at this point. The goal of cultural Marxism, the goal of cultural Marxism is anything that will weaken the targeted nation or culture in a way that makes it more vulnerable to greater control and takeover by Marxist elites. We'll look at some of them now, and we'll start with this segment 7, which is entitled ESG and DEI. ESG means environmental, social, and governance ratings of U.S. companies, and the related DEI means diversity, equity, and inclusion principles and purposes. We have a democratic republic that has stood on the shoulders of Western civilization, which in turn has stood on the shoulders of Judeo-Christian tradition and values. We favor things like the rule of law and individual rights. So our Constitution has figurative sideboards that our government must operate within. It can't jump the sideboards, or it will, at least theoretically, be corrected by the court system. Checks and balances. But if the powers that be still want some of the forbidden fruit, power, control, wealth, that lies outside those sideboards, one way to do that is to have non-governmental entities do the dirty work in hopes that they're less likely to get caught and corrected. Governmental pursuit of unconstitutional ends via collaboration with private entities is reportedly one definition of fascism, which to me is just a somewhat different road or path leading to the same destination of totalitarian, authoritarian rule. I use those two terms interchangeably, totalitarian, authoritarian. In recent years, one type of dirty work being done in a realm where the government constitutionally can't directly tread is being done by those large financial firms I mentioned earlier, the ones who sell you shares of their companies, mutual funds and exchange-traded funds, ETFs, which in turn hold stocks that are actually owned by the financial company itself, making it the entity that votes the stock in those companies. When it attains a major or controlling interest in a company's stock, it has gained the ability to control that company and dictate policies to be followed. Enter ESG and DEI. For the moment, let's call the financial companies and their political allies, like the World Economic Forum, the elites. We'll turn first to ESG. ESG, environmental, social, and governance dogma imposed by the elites, is injected into the policy goals of the victim companies. Here are some examples. Environmental goals: adoption and implementation of the climate change agenda being imposed by the elites, meaning opposition to the use of fossil fuels and the advocacy of renewable intermittent energy sources like wind and solar. So you get results like fossil fuel antagonists appointed to the boards of oil companies and immense sums of precious dollars simply wasted. That was environmental goals. Let's move on to social goals. Social goals would include adoption and implementation of critical theory in its various forms, pro-abortion policies, and transgender activism. Race and the broad realm of sexuality are tried and true Marxist goals, Marxist tools to fragment national unity and create division in a nation. And a major element of the social goals has been to substitute the concept of equity for equality, with equity meaning equal outcomes instead of equal opportunity, and the replacement of shareholders with stakeholders in formulating company goals and objectives. Stakeholders can mean buyers of company products or anyone claiming to be impacted by the company. Squib. Stakeholder capitalism isn't capitalism at all. It's communist social policies being applied to companies and firms of all sizes that dictate who they hire, who they do business with, what they produce, and how. Each company is ranked with an ESG score. That is, for all intents and purposes, a social credit scoring system similar to what is in place in China. Companies with low ESG scores would no longer be able to take out loans, win government contracts, or perhaps even list their stock on an exchange. Investment firms would refuse to invest in companies with low scores. And if you do business with a company with an unacceptable ESG score, you can get canceled too. Moving on to governance goals. Governance goals include employee and management race or ethnicity quotas, compensation tied to meeting ESG goals, and the use of social credit scores to skew internal and external policy away from traditional business goals to serving Marxist-imposed goals. We move then to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as I understand them. Diversity in and of itself can be a laudable thing in building a workforce. And I've had good experiences in working for women and black supervisors. But the actual meaning of DEI within this context seems to infer an abandonment of our American melting pot ideal in favor of things like hiring and promoting via quotas instead of merit. So while diversity itself can be good, this specific application has a militant or divisive aura about it that concerns me. That's diversity. Moving to equity. Equity is the concept of emphasizing or serving the stated interests of officially aggrieved racial, ethnic, gender, environmental, worker, consumer, neighbors, and other stakeholders rather than the shareholders who own the company. Stakeholders is the socialist camel's nose under the free enterprise tent. Equity may also be more directly where employment equal outcomes are advocated instead of equal opportunity or merit. And our last term, inclusion. Inclusion seems to speak to the inclusion of racial, women's, sexual, environmentalist, and other critical theory ideologies in company policy making. These three terms, DEI, are of course intertwined, but redistribution and equal outcomes seem to be a uniting factor. And it's not just in corporate America. The results of DEI have been especially damaging in higher education, as illustrated by the alarming support of Hamas terrorists in Gaza by U.S. Ivy League college students. Let me finish here, and I'll have a bit more on that. So continuing on DEI, I haven't personally seen answers to questions like where the resources are going to come from to make all outcomes equal, or who's going to decide who gets what. But I believe I do know where it leads, to living conditions as seen in socialist or communist countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, China, North Korea, and so on. And I am struck that the elite advocates of Marxist transformation don't want to move to any of those countries to actually live there. And that completes our coverage of ESG and DEI. Let me go back just a moment and turn back briefly to that sidebar item I wanted to mention just a moment ago. I have just received confirmation from an honest source of something I had suspected but didn't know. From the militarily neat rows of identical brand new tents on one of the college protest sites. And I'll quote it directly. This is a quote. In the days following these demonstrations, we learned that more than half the protesters were actually non-student professional agitators on the payroll of organizations receiving dark money from George Soros, Bill Gates, the Rockefeller Foundation, and Goldman Sachs, quote, unquote. Okay, after the break, we'll move along to the topic of our next segment, which will be the LGBTQIA+ movement. Thank you for watching.